On November 16, 1951, as the morning mist receded from Portsmouth Harbor, Captain Dennis Campbell ascended the gangplank of HMS Illustrious. Within his attaché case lay a single document, a schematic so rudimentary a child might have conceived it, a flight deck canted precisely 10 degrees to port. On its surface, it offered no apparent innovation. Yet, unbeknownst to its designer, this humble drawing, within 18 months, would prove more instrumental in preserving the lives of naval aviators than any weapon ever forged. What Captain Campbell did comprehend, however, instilled in him profound dread. In the preceding 12-month period alone, the Royal Navy had suffered the loss of 43 aircraft due to landing mishaps, 43 machines rendered irreparable, 17 pilots tragically deceased, and a multitude more grievously injured. Every single one of these calamitous events transpired during the final 30 seconds of flight, that critical juncture when a 30-ton jet hurtling at 140 miles per hour endeavors to snare a wire on a heaving deck with a steel barricade looming 60 feet ahead, poised to eviscerate any aircraft that strayed. The American forces endured even more dire statistics. In 1951, United States Navy carrier aviation recorded 776 Class A incidents, accidents resulting in fatalities or aircraft destruction, averaging more than 2 per day. The Korean War, far from being a period of peace, exacerbated this carnage. The USS Boxer reported 7 barrier collisions during a single deployment, while the Princeton lost 9 aircraft within a 4-week span. On carriers with conventional straight decks, failing to engage the arresting wires invariably led to one of 2 grim outcomes: either a catastrophic impact with the barricade at full throttle, or a devastating plunge into aircraft parked forward, igniting an inferno capable of consuming a dozen lives in mere seconds. The jet age had dawned, but carrier operations struggled to adapt. The F9F Panther, with its landing speed 40 knots superior to the propeller-driven Hellcat, posed a formidable challenge. The jet's engines, when idling, required a laborious 7 seconds to spool up, an eternity when one is descending towards the unforgiving ocean at 20 feet per second. Landing signal officers, positioned on the carrier's stern quarter, gestured frantically with paddles. Yet, by the time a pilot recognized an approach was too low, too fast, or too high, the unyielding laws of physics had already sealed his fate. Every admiral, every engineer, every test pilot recognized the stark reality. Carrier aviation had reached its absolute limit. Jets represented the future, but a future held little promise when the present was claiming the lives of its personnel. What Captain Campbell failed to grasp, and what remained unknown to everyone gathered in that Port South conference room, was that his audacious concept would be met with outright rejection, derision, and pronouncements of impossibility from the very experts tasked with tackling such challenges. The breakthrough, it turned out, would not originate from committees or wind tunnels, but from the unwavering resolve of a single individual who refused to accept that competent men should perish due to an inherent design deficiency. The genesis of this crisis can be traced back to 1945, specifically to the moment Lieutenant Commander William P. Rahn executed the inaugural jet landing aboard the USS Wake Island. His FFR-1, upon touchdown at 90 knots, 20 knots faster than any piston-powered fighter, subjected the arresting gear cables to immense kinetic forces. The landing itself was successful, but the warning it conveyed went unheeded. By 1950, every major naval power faced a parallel predicament. Jet engines conferred unprecedented speed and altitude capabilities, but their sluggish throttle response created a deadly trap. With propeller aircraft, pilots could readily chop power upon the landing signal officer's abort command, effectively falling onto the deck. Jets lacked this agility. They had to maintain power throughout the landing, keeping engines engaged until touchdown, lest they be unable to achieve sufficient thrust for a go-around if needed. This manufactured a nightmarish scenario. Pilots executed their final approach with engines at high power, committed to landing, and critically, incapable of a rapid climb should they miss the arresting wires. On a conventional straight-deck carrier, 4 arresting wires spanned a 60-foot section of the deck. Beyond them lay the barricade, a network of steel cables designed to ensnare aircraft that missed. Further still, rows of parked aircraft, fuel trucks, and ordnance carts, all the accoutrements of an active flight deck, transforming it into a potential inferno. The mathematical odds were grim. A Panther jet descending at 125 knots covered 211 feet per second. Should a pilot fail to catch any of the 4 wires, he had precisely 2.1 seconds before impacting the barricade. The barricade, on occasion, functioned as intended. When it failed, however, 30 tons of jet fuel and ordnance would careen into the aircraft parked forward at speeds approaching 100 miles per hour. Captain Bruce Williams, the air operations officer aboard the USS Courage, bore witness to the demise of 11 men when a barrier failed in March 1951. The accident report detailed how the aircraft, striking the barrier at full power, caused it to separate. The aircraft continued forward, colliding with 6 parked Corsairs. The ensuing conflagration ignited aviation gasoline stores, resulting in the destruction of 14 aircraft, the loss of 11 personnel, and injuries to 23 others. Carrier operations were suspended for 48 hours. The prevailing solution everyone pursued was the development of improved barriers. The British experimented with the flex deck, a resilient landing surface designed to theoretically capture jets without the need for landing gear. Test pilot Lieutenant Commander Eric Brown conducted 40 landings on this system at Farnborough, reporting in official documents that it was fundamentally sound. To his colleagues, however, he privately described it as bloody terrifying. Meanwhile, the Americans focused on constructing more robust barricades. The Bureau of Aeronautics allocated $3.22 million to the development of the Davis barrier system, a mechanical net engineered to halt a 25,000-pound aircraft at full throttle. When successful, its performance was impressive. When it failed, the devastation was absolute. Yet stronger barriers did not prevent crashes, they merely contained the aftermath. Every senior aviator grasped the fundamental issue: the flight deck itself. Captain William T. Roger, then head of aviation military characteristics at the Office of the Deputy Chief of Naval Operations, penned in June 1945, "Current landing procedures force all aircraft into a 60-foot impact zone with zero margin for error. This is incompatible with jet aircraft performance characteristics." In essence, they were attempting to land 1952 aircraft on 1942 ships. Lives would continue to be lost until this fundamental mismatch was rectified. There was universal agreement on the problem, but no viable solution emerged. The British pursued flex decks, the Americans enhanced barriers, developing backup systems and emergency nets, while the French attempted to reduce aircraft weight. None of these endeavors proved effective, and the accident rate continued to climb. What was required was someone with the audacious vision to question the one element no one dared to challenge. Why must the landing area always be aligned with the ship's axis? The individual they needed was Dennis Campbell. Captain Dennis Royal Farson Campbell was not destined to be a problem solver in the traditional sense. He was, by training, a bureaucrat. Born on November 13, 1907, in Southsea, England, Campbell entered the Royal Navy in 1925 as a midshipman. He qualified as a pilot in September 1931, early enough to have flown fabric biplanes, yet late enough to understand that naval aviation was no mere gentleman's pursuit, but a demanding profession requiring meticulous engineering. During the Second World War, he piloted Fairey Swordfish torpedo bombers, an antiquated aircraft that, against all odds, crippled the Bismarck. He was awarded the Distinguished Service Cross. No one referred to him as a genius nor a visionary. Post-war, Admiral T assigned him to the Ministry of Supply as Deputy Chief, Royal Navy Representative, a desk role focused on managing technical liaison between the Navy and civilian manufacturers. He possessed no engineering qualifications, no advanced academic degrees. His responsibilities entailed administrative tasks, tracking project timelines, attending coordination meetings, and authorizing requisitions. However, Dennis Campbell possessed a singular quality that cannot be acquired through formal credentials: an inability to disregard the deaths of pilots. In 1951, he attended the funeral of Lieutenant Michael Mick Lithgow, a test pilot killed when his jet struck the barricade on HMS Implacable. Lithgow had been Campbell's student, merely 23 years old. His approach had been perfect, his speed precise, but he had floated 6 feet too far, missing the wires. The barricade failed. Lithgow's aircraft was annihilated. His widow was 5 months pregnant. Standing at that graveside, Campbell later confided to his deputy, Lieutenant Commander Nick Goodhart, "This is madness. We are slaughtering them with our own equipment. A pilot executes everything perfectly and still dies because 60 feet is insufficient margin for error. There must be another way." Goodhart, accustomed to such sentiments expressed at funerals, anticipated nothing more. But Campbell's obsession persisted. He meticulously reviewed accident reports, interviewed landing signal officers, and studied landing patterns. Not being an engineer, he adopted a common approach for non-technical individuals. He drew diagrams. The crucial insight arrived during a train journey from Portsmouth to London. Campbell began sketching carrier decks in his notebook, striving to visualize how to grant pilots more room for error. If the landing area could not be lengthened, it could be widened. And if it could not be widened due to the ship's fixed beam, it could be angled. He sketched a flight deck canted 10 degrees to port. With this modification, the landing zone would no longer terminate at the barricade. It would extend over open water. An aircraft that missed the wires could immediately advance its throttle, ascend, and attempt another landing. This eliminated the threat of the barricade, of parked aircraft, of catastrophic collisions, offering instead a clear expanse of air and sea and a second opportunity. The concept was so disarmingly simple it felt almost foolish, suggesting either a stroke of brilliance or the oversight of an obvious detail known to every seasoned engineer. On August 7, 1951, Captain Dennis Campbell convened a meeting at the Ministry of Supply. In attendance were Louis Boddington, Director of the Naval Air Department at Farne, Rear Admiral M.S. Slattery, Chief of Naval Research, and 6 senior aviation engineers. Campbell opened his briefcase and presented his sketch. The room erupted. "That is completely illegal," declared Commander James, a senior flight operations specialist, his voice calm but carrying the weight of authority. He saw no need to raise his tone. His words resonated as if dictated by the very laws of physics. The International Air Navigation Convention mandates that all flight operations align with the vessel's axis. Your proposal contravenes maritime aviation law, established after 15 years of carrier operations. This is not innovation, Captain. It is amateurish folly. Campbell had anticipated resistance, but not such palpable condescension. You are asking pilots to land across the ship's natural movement. Carriers pitch and roll along their keel. An angled deck forces pilots to approach at an angle to that motion. They will be in constant combat with drift. The landing area will be shifting beneath them in unpredictable ways. You will increase crashes, not reduce them. Lieutenant Commander Goodhart began to interject, but Louis Boddington, the civilian engineer from Farnborough, raised a hand. "Show me the mathematics," he requested, his gaze sharp. "I beg your pardon?" Boddington repeated, his tone firm. "The mathematics. You contend pilots will struggle with drift. Quantify it. An 8-degree angle on a deck experiencing 12-degree rolls. What is the differential drift over a 30-second approach?" A profound silence descended upon the room. Boddington surveyed the assembled engineers. No one spoke. "Then we shall test it," Boddington declared. "Captain Campbell, The Royal Aircraft Establishment at Farnborough has a painted runway outline. We can paint an angled deck outline on HMS Triumph's flight deck. In 1 week, we will conduct simulated touch-and-go approaches. If the drift problem is real, we will measure it. If it is merely theoretical alarmism, we will know that as well. Rear Admiral Slattery leaned back, his expression thoughtful. Lewis, you understand that if you paint an angled deck on the Triumph and pilots begin to crash, you will be ending both your career and Captain Campbell's. Noted, sir, Boddington replied. And if it succeeds, he added with a faint smile, then we will stop losing pilots who have done everything correctly. The trials commenced in September 1951. HMS Triumph departed Portsmouth with an angled deck delineated in white paint across its axial flight deck, a purely aesthetic modification, not a structural one. For 3 weeks, naval pilots executed touch-and-go approaches, treating the painted line as a tangible deck edge. The predicted drift problem proved non-existent. Pilots adapted within 2 landings, discovering instead a newfound sense of freedom. Lieutenant Peter Chilton, one of the test pilots, later recounted, "I approached too high, floated past the wires, and for the first time in my career, I felt no terror. I simply advanced the throttle and climbed away. No barricade awaited to claim me. No aircraft occupied the path forward, only clean air and a second chance. It felt as though my life had been returned to me." By October, the painted deck trials had definitively validated the concept. The arduous task of convincing everyone else now lay ahead. While HMS Triumph was British, the carrier grappling with the most acute problem, the one whose pilots were perishing at twice the Royal Navy's rate, was American. And the United States Navy was notoriously reluctant to accept guidance on aircraft recovery from British officers. On September 14, 1951, at the U.S. Naval Air Test Center in Puxent River, Maryland, Lieutenant Commander Eric Brown stood before 40 American test pilots, acutely aware of every scrutinizing gaze, calculating whether to place their trust in him. Brown held the esteemed position of Chief Test Pilot for the Royal Navy, a man who had landed more distinct aircraft types than anyone in history, possessing every significant British naval aviation record. Yet, at that moment, all those accolades seemed irrelevant as he prepared to inform the U.S. Navy that their carriers were fundamentally flawed in design. "Gentlemen," Brown began, his voice steady, "in the past 12 months, how many of you have encountered the barricade?" 7 hands rose hesitantly, then 12, then 15. "How many of you know someone who died as a result of hitting the barricade?" Every hand shot up. Brown opened his briefcase. "I am about to present something the Royal Navy is currently testing. It may sound extraordinary, but I have personally completed 63 landings on it, and I am standing here rather than being scraped from a deck. Therefore, I implore you to hear me out." He then affixed Campbell's diagram to the wall. An aircraft carrier flight deck canted 8 degrees to port. The room ignited. "You expect us to land sideways? The LSO cannot possibly track the approach angle. What about the island? You've moved the landing zone perilously close to the superstructure." Brown waited patiently for the clamor to subside. "Every objection you have just voiced, we ourselves raised. Then we tested the concept. And here is what we discovered. When you miss the wires on an angled deck, you do not perish. You advance the throttle and commence a go-around. It is that simple." Commander Harold Buell, commanding officer of VF-84, stepped forward. "Commander Brown, I have been landing on carriers since 1943. What you propose directly contradicts every principle we have developed through 8 years of combat operations. You are asking us to discard proven doctrine for a British theory. I am asking you to cease dying due to a design flaw," Brown countered. The room fell silent. Brown continued, "You are landing jets on straight decks because that is what you possess. But straight decks were engineered for aircraft like the Corsair and the Hellcat, which could cut throttle and descend onto the deck. Jets cannot replicate that maneuver. Consequently, You are attempting to apply 1952 aircraft capabilities to 1942 operational procedures, and your personnel are paying the ultimate price. The angled deck does not violate doctrine. It adapts the carrier to the performance characteristics of the aircraft. Rear Admiral Apollo Susk, the senior U.S. Navy aviator stationed in London, stepped forward. I have observed the Triumph trials. Commander Brown is accurate. The concept functions. I have submitted a recommendation to the Chief of Naval Operations for parallel testing on the USS Midway. However, Rear Admiral Alfred Pride, Chief of the Bureau of Aeronautics, shook his head. We are already exploring alternative solutions. The Davis barrier boasts a 98.7% success rate. 98.7% of what? Brown interrupted. Of the aircraft that actually strike it? What about the pilots who never reach the barrier because they perceive its imminent threat and panic? What of those who deliberately ditch their aircraft in the ocean rather than risk a full power impact with the barricade? Your statistic measures barrier efficacy, not pilot survivability. The room erupted once more. Half the pilots were nodding in agreement, while the other half appeared ready to forcibly remove Brown from the premises. Admiral Susk raised his voice, commanding, "Gentlemen, gentlemen, silence! We will proceed with testing the angled deck on the USS Midway. Initial trials will involve painted markings and simulated landings. If it proves effective, we will undertake structural modifications on one carrier for full implementation. If it fails, the concept will be abandoned. But we cannot continue to lose pilots to a design flaw that we have the capacity to test and potentially rectify. Is that understood?" Admiral Pride stood silently for 10 seconds, then spoke. "Midway trials are authorized. However, should this British pipe dream result in even a single additional casualty, I will terminate the program and hold everyone associated with it accountable." Susk nodded in agreement. The meeting concluded. Brown packed his briefcase, acutely aware that he had just risked his entire career on a painted line. What he did not yet know was that within 90 days, the painted line on the Midway would prove so effective that the U.S. Navy would convert the USS Antietam into the world's first genuine angled deck carrier. If you are captivated by pivotal moments where individual courage reshaped history, ensure you are subscribed and have activated the notification bell, because what transpired next when the first pilot landed on the Antietam's angled deck irrevocably altered the course of naval warfare. But first, allow me to recount January 12, 1953. Off the coast of Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, Lieutenant Commander Harold Buell guided his F9F Panther into the landing pattern behind the USS Antietam. This marked his 43rd carrier landing, but it was his inaugural approach on an angled deck that was not merely painted, it was structurally integrated. An 8-degree sponson extended from the port side, welded securely to the carrier's hull. Buell harbored reservations. His entire career had been dedicated to the precise art of snagging the wires or confronting the barricade, a fear that had, on 2 prior occasions, saved his life. Now he was being instructed to disregard it. He lowered his landing gear, adjusted his trim, and called for the ball. "Panther ball, 3.2. Roger, ball," the landing signal officer responded. Buell's approach was flawless until a sudden gust of wind momentarily lifted his eye level. The aircraft was 6 feet high. On a straight deck, this would necessitate a wave-off from the LSO, compelling Buell to abort, expend precious fuel, and initiate another attempt. But on this day, the LSO remained silent. Because on an angled deck, being high was not a catastrophe. It was an opportunity for correction. Buell subtly lowered the nose, bleeding off altitude, but now he was long, destined to miss the wires on a straight deck. This was the point where panic typically set in, where pilots executed desperate, often fatal corrective maneuvers. Yet, Buell forced himself to adhere to the briefing. "If you miss, you climb. The deck is clear. Trust it." His wheels slammed onto the deck. He bounced once. His tailhook skipped over the first wire, then the second, the third, and finally the fourth. He had missed them all. On a straight deck, the barricade would already be pulverizing his aircraft. But here, there was no barricade, only an open deck and clear sky. Buell jammed his throttle forward. His J-48 engine spooled up in 6 seconds, an eternity that felt like a reprieve. The Panther lifted. He was airborne once more. 23 seconds later, he was re-entering the pattern. His second approach was successful. He caught the 3-wire. A perfect landing. Buell disembarked from his cockpit, his hands trembling, not from fear, but from a profound relief he hadn't realized he had been carrying for years. He would later write in his autobiography, "To an experienced tailhooker, landing a jet airplane on an angled deck was sheer bliss. For the first time in my career, I wasn't afraid of dying during every approach. The psychological weight that lifted off me that day, I didn't realize I'd been carrying it until it was gone." Over the subsequent 60 days, Carrier Air Group 8 completed 1,327 landings on the Antietam's angled deck. They recorded 8 bolters, missed wires requiring go-arounds. On a straight deck, 8 bolters might have translated into 5 barrier crashes, 2 aircraft destroyed, and 1 or 2 pilot fatalities. On the angled deck, there were 0 crashes, 0 aircraft destroyed, and 0 injuries. The data was irrefutable. Prior to the angled deck, from 1950 to 1952, U.S. Navy carrier aviation averaged 647 Class A mishaps annually, with landing accidents constituting 52% of all losses. Following the implementation of the angled deck, from 1955 to 1957, Class A mishaps decreased to 321 per year, with landing accidents accounting for only 19% of losses. This represented a reduction of 75% fewer landing accidents and 80% fewer barrier-related fatalities. However, statistics alone do not capture the human narrative. Lieutenant James Davidson does. On March 8, 1953, Davidson brought his damaged Panther back to the Antietam. A hydraulic failure rendered his flaps inoperative. His landing speed was 20 knots faster than optimal. On a straight deck, he would have opted to ditch in the ocean rather than risk a barrier crash at 145 knots. But the Antietam boasted an angled deck. Davidson executed 4 approaches. He missed the wires on every single attempt. On his 4th attempt, he successfully intercepts the 4-wire at a speed of 142 knots, marking the swiftest authenticated carrier landing achieved up to that point. His aircraft halts with only 11 feet of the flight deck remaining. 6 months later, he dispatches a letter to Captain Campbell, stating, "Sir, I never had the pleasure of meeting you, yet I am here to pen this correspondence because of an idea you conceived, an idea everyone deemed unattainable. My daughter was born last month. I was present for her arrival because you refused to resign yourself to the notion that competent aviators should perish due to flawed engineering." The words "thank you" feel insufficient, but nevertheless, thank you. The British introduced angled decks to the Ark Royal in 1955. The French refit the Clemenceau. The Australians reconfigure the Melbourne. By 1957, every prominent aircraft carrier in the Western world either boasts an angled deck or is undergoing modification to incorporate one. The Soviets initially dismissed the concept. However, in 1959, following a series of devastating landing mishaps aboard their conventionally designed carrier, the Variag, they quietly adopt the innovation. Declassified Soviet naval documents from 1993 reveal a 68% reduction in landing accidents within 6 months of implementation. Yet, the most compelling evidence originates from the pilots themselves. Captain John Moore, who engaged in combat sorties over Vietnam from the USS Coral Sea, recounts, "Between 1954 and 1973, I executed 947 carrier landings. On a straight deck, I aborted and missed all the wires 62 times. That represents 62 potential barrier entanglements. That's 62 opportunities to meet my end or endanger the sailors stationed forward. Instead, I simply ascended and attempted the approach anew. Every pilot my age has those moments where we recall our comrades lost in the 50s due to collisions. We are alive today because Dennis Campbell sketched a line on a piece of paper and adamantly refused to abandon the idea. By 1975, the angled deck has become so ubiquitous that younger pilots are unaware carriers were once designed differently. It is no longer considered an innovation. It is simply the standard operational configuration for carriers. A revolution achieves its ultimate success when it becomes imperceptible. The angled deck is credited with saving thousands of lives, yet Dennis Campbell never pursued personal acclaim for this achievement. In fact, his actions following this significant breakthrough might prove even more surprising. But before we delve into that, if you know a veteran or someone with a passion for military history, please consider sharing this video with them. These narratives hold significant value. Now, let us explore what transpired with the man who irrevocably transformed carrier aviation. Captain Dennis Campbell never granted a press interview concerning the angled deck. He attained the rank of Rear Admiral in 1954. He was present at the ceremonies for the launch of HMS Ark Royal, the world's inaugural carrier meticulously engineered from the keel upwards with an angled deck. When reporters sought his commentary, he directed them to Louis Boatington and the engineers at Farnborough. In 1955, when the United States Navy extended an invitation to the commissioning of the USS Forrestal, America's first supercarrier equipped with an angled deck, steam catapults, and an optical landing aid, Campbell politely declined. He was attending a funeral for a Royal Navy lieutenant who had tragically perished in a training accident. This incident involved a helicopter crash, entirely unrelated to Campbell's work, but the lieutenant had served under his command in 1943, and Campbell firmly believed in the principle of attending funerals for one's people, regardless of the circumstances. In 1957, Admiral T bestowed upon him the CBE, Commander of the Order of the British Empire, in recognition of his contributions to naval aviation. The official commendation comprised merely 2 sentences. Campbell kept it stored in a drawer. He retired from the Royal Navy in 1960 and subsequently accepted a role as a technical consultant for Hawker Siddeley Aviation, focusing on the advancement of vertical takeoff jet aircraft. His colleagues remember him for his relentless dedication to pilot safety, frequently causing frustration among designers due to his insistence on incorporating superfluous redundancies into cockpit systems. Dennis would invariably prolong every design review, recalled engineer Anthony Marsh, posing inquiries such as, what is the potential outcome if this component fails during nighttime operations in adverse weather conditions? We would inform him that the probability of such a failure was 1 in 10,000. He would then counter with, and what course of action does the pilot undertake when that eventuality occurs? He was never concerned with statistical probabilities. His focus was invariably on the single pilot who happened to experience misfortune. Campbell passed away on April 6, 2000, at the age of 92. His obituary in the Times spanned 4 paragraphs. The Guardian published 6. Both publications made mention of the angled deck, but neither adequately conveyed its profound significance, its true meaning. Every carrier landing conducted since 1953 is a direct consequence of one pilot's unwavering refusal to accept that his colleagues should meet a preventable demise. Today, every aircraft carrier globally, whether American, British, French, Indian, Chinese, or Russian, utilizes an angled deck configuration. The United States Navy's cutting-edge Gerald R. Ford-class carriers are equipped with sophisticated electromagnetic catapults and arresting gear, yet the deck remains angled at precisely 8 degrees to port, precisely as Campbell envisioned it in 1951. Modern carrier pilots execute upwards of 15,000 landings annually across the United States Navy's fleet alone. The bolter rate, approximately 8%, translates to approximately 1,200 missed wire approaches each year. Without the angled deck, These would constitute 1,200 potential barrier crashes. How many lives have been preserved? Hundreds every year. Tens of thousands over 7 decades. Lieutenant Colonel Arthur Black, United States Marine Corps, who flew FA-18s from carriers between 1985 and 2007, located Campbell's family in 2003 and sent them a letter. It read, "I never had the privilege of meeting your father, but I completed 147 carrier landings during my military service. I aborted and missed all the wires 14 times, requiring me to go around on a straight deck. That represents 142 instances where my life could have been tragically cut short. Instead, I simply ascended and commenced the approach again. Your father afforded me 142 second chances. He enabled my career, he granted me my life. On behalf of every carrier pilot who continues to live because of his foresight, I extend my profound gratitude." Dennis Campbell never replied to that letter. He had been deceased for 3 years, but his son meticulously framed it, recognizing his father's consistent practice of not keeping his own commendations. However, he undoubtedly would have treasured that letter. The crucial lesson here is that certain groundbreaking advancements do not originate from established experts. They emerge from individuals who reject the notion that this is how it has always been done as a valid justification. Captain Campbell was neither an engineer nor a test pilot. He was a bureaucrat who could not overlook the loss of his comrades and possessed the courage to draw a simple line on paper and question the prevailing assumptions. The angled deck has saved more lives than any recipient of the Medal of Honor. It has revolutionized naval warfare to a greater extent than nuclear power or guided missiles. Yet, its genesis was not in committee meetings or sterile laboratories. It stemmed from a train journey, a notebook, a sketch, and an unwavering refusal to remain silent when confronted with universal skepticism. That is the true narrative. That is why it holds such significance. Because the next Dennis Campbell may not hold the rank of admiral or possess the credentials of an engineer. He might lack formal qualifications or advanced degrees. He might simply be an individual who observes a problem that everyone accepts and refuses to acquiesce to it. History is not always forged by the loudest voices or the highest-ranking officials. At times, it is shaped by the single individual who prevents good people from perishing due to a flawed system.